black and white photograph was taken in Chile in 1920. Inside the coffin lies a 19-year-old Carmelite nun. To those gathered around her body, this should have been a tragedy. A young woman from a wealthy family had entered a convent, only to die less than a year later from a sudden illness. But almost immediately, strange stories began to spread. The young girl had reportedly spent months writing about death, not as an abstract idea, but as though she believed it was approaching her personally. According to witnesses, she repeatedly spoke about leaving the world early. Some later claimed she seemed spiritually prepared long before she became sick. Then, at 19 years old, she died, and the photograph taken at her funeral would become one of the most haunting religious images in modern Chilean history. Her name was Teresa of the Andes. Long before she became Saint Teresa of the Andes, she was Juana Fernandez Solar, a wealthy Chilean girl born into one of Santiago's most privileged families at the beginning of the 20th century. By outward appearances, her life seemed ordinary. She loved horseback riding, sports, music, and social gatherings. Nothing about the smiling teenager in family photographs suggests a future saint. Yet those who knew her later described an unusual intensity beneath the surface. As a teenager, Juana began keeping journals and writing letters describing a profound interior life. She wrote about prayer not as ritual, but as a real encounter with someone she believed was present. To her, Jesus Christ was not an abstract theological idea. He was alive. Over time, that conviction began pulling her away from the world around her. While friends dreamed about marriage and social life, Juana became increasingly drawn towards sacrifice, suffering, and contemplative prayer. She immersed herself in the writings of Carmelite mystics like Saint Teresa of Avila and Saint John of the Cross. To many around her, the transformation seemed difficult to understand. She was young, educated, attractive, and socially successful. She had every opportunity for a comfortable future. Yet privately, her writings began taking an increasingly unsettling tone. Again and again, the teenager wrote about leaving the world behind, belonging entirely to Christ, and sometimes about death itself. Years later, after her early death shocked Chile, readers would revisit these pages with growing unease, because some believed the young girl writing them already sensed her life would not be long. By the age of 17, Juana had become convinced that God was calling her to religious life. The destination she chose shocked many around her. The Discalced Carmelites, one of the strictest religious orders in the Catholic Church. Carmelite life revolved around silence, enclosure, fasting, sacrifice, and long hours of prayer. The nuns lived separated from the outside world behind convent walls most people would never enter. For a wealthy young woman from Chilean high society, the decision seemed extreme. But according to her writings, Juana believed this hidden life was exactly where she belonged. In May of 1919, at 18 years old, she entered the Carmelite monastery in Los Andes, Chile, taking the name Teresa of Jesus. Inside the convent, witnesses say the young novice appeared overwhelmingly happy. The strict schedule and physical discomfort did not seem to disturb her. In fact, some of her most intense spiritual writings come from this period. She described feeling closer to Christ than ever before. But during these same months, Teresa continued writing things that later readers found deeply unsettling. Again and again, she spoke as though her time on earth would be brief. Not vaguely or symbolically, but with a strange sense of certainty. Then, less than a year after entering the convent, she suddenly became gravely ill. In 1920, the young girl who had entered Carmel full of joy was suddenly becoming seriously ill. The exact diagnosis still remains uncertain today. Some historians believe she suffered from typhus, Others suspect complications connected to lingering influenza outbreaks after the Spanish flu pandemic. Whatever the cause, by Holy Week of 1920, it had become obvious that 19-year-old Teresa was dying. According to witnesses inside the convent, her behavior during those final days deeply affected the other nuns. There was fear inside the monastery, but apparently not from Teresa herself. Accounts describe the dying teenager as calm, even joyful. While her body weakened, she reportedly continued speaking about Christ, heaven, and eternity with remarkable serenity. As her condition worsened, convent authorities made an extraordinary decision. Because Teresa had not yet completed her religious profession, permission was granted for her to make her final vows early, directly from her deathbed. Soon afterward, witnesses claimed she entered periods of intense prayer and spiritual absorption. Some nuns later described her speaking as though Christ himself was near. Then, on April 12, 1920, Teresa of the Andes died. She had spent less than 1 year inside the convent, but almost immediately after her death, stories began spreading beyond the monastery walls. Stories about her writings, her strange certainty about dying young, and the growing belief among some Chilean Catholics that the young Carmelite nun had not been ordinary at all. On April 13, 1920, Teresa's body was prepared for burial. A photograph taken during the funeral still survives today. In the image, the young Carmelite lies motionless inside a coffin surrounded by flowers and mourners. Over time, the photograph would become one of the most recognizable religious images in Chilean Catholicism. By the time the funeral took place, stories about the young nun had already begun spreading. After her death, letters and journal entries circulated among clergy and lay Catholics. Readers became fascinated by passages where Teresa repeatedly spoke about heaven, death, and leaving the world behind. To some, the words sounded almost prophetic. Then came reports of favors and answered prayers. Pilgrims began traveling to the convent in Los Andes, and devotion to the unknown 19-year-old nun spread rapidly throughout Chile. What made the story remarkable was how quickly it happened. Teresa had never preached publicly, founded a religious order, or become famous during her lifetime. She had lived hidden behind convent walls for less than a year. Yet after her death, many believers became convinced that the girl in the funeral photograph had possessed something impossible to explain. Over the decades that followed, devotion to Teresa of the Andes continued growing throughout Latin America. Her writings spread widely. Pilgrims traveled to her tomb asking for miracles, conversions, and spiritual help. Reports of favors and healings multiplied. Eventually, the Vatican opened a formal investigation into her life, examining her writings, witness testimony, and alleged miracles attributed to her intercession. And in 1987, Pope John Paul II beatified her before massive crowds in Chile. 6 years later, in 1993, Teresa of the Andes became the first Chilean-born saint in the history of the Catholic Church. Today, more than a century after her death, historians still debate the mystery surrounding her final months. Skeptics argue that many claims about her foreknowledge were shaped after the fact by grieving admirers. Others believe her writings reveal something more profound. No one can prove whether Teresa possessed genuine mystical insight. No one can prove whether her calm acceptance of death came from supernatural certainty or extraordinary psychological conviction. But the mystery has never completely disappeared, because in the funeral photograph taken in Chile in 1920, viewers are still confronted with something difficult to ignore: a modern teenage girl who seems strangely prepared to die. If you found this story interesting, please hit the like button. And if you'd like to see more stories like this one, please subscribe to the channel.